10 days for a home inspection, you might alter it to be 5 or 3. And that whole goal is to know what you're buying, basically. That's the whole idea of a home inspection, any and all. And so we're going to talk about the different types, but my next step is, all right, we won the bid. We need to schedule a home inspection. And so I always recommend that agents give choices, right? Yeah. Just to give them choices. And that's just for liability, because what happens is when I give you one and something doesn't go well, they're going to say you're inspector, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, in that way, and I'm sure, Kim, you do the same thing. I'll give them the phone number. I'll give them the website, say, hey, you can go and check them out. Some of them do handwritten reports. Some of them do online reports. Mm-hmm. And it kind of depends on, some will get on the roof, some won't. So it's more comforting as a realtor knowing that your client, your buyer, has chosen that inspector, because again, you, like Kim said, your inspector, the inspector that works for your company, no.
Right.
So it's nice to have them. Now, if a client says to me, I don't know any home inspectors or all that, again, that's another great way of giving them 2 or 3. And I usually do 2 or 3 recommendations, but then I also remind them, hey, you don't have to go with these people. You can have whoever you like inspect the home on your behalf.
Mm-hmm. And it's really nice if you have a little cheat sheet of service providers. It might have several that you like for home inspectors, lenders, pest, radon, people that you do business with, and you can share it. I share that with them. And like you just said, you're not limited to these. These are a few I've worked with. I tend to, like the way they do business, but it definitely is up to you. And it's very important. And then you mentioned another thing is it's important to know, is it a handwritten report? Is it a digital report? It's hard if you're on your 9th day of a 10-day inspection and you have an inspector who handwrites, and it's going to take a couple days to be delivered. So one of the questions I will always ask is, when can I expect the report?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, because often, often we are all on timelines, and I don't like to do things on the 10th day. I want it on the 7th or 8th day. So we want to ask them, when will I get the report? The other thing that I do personally, and there's so many different ways, some agents go to inspections, some don't. We're going to come back and talk about that. What I will do as a service is, I know my clients are busy. I'll let them choose. And then I might even call around and say, hey, here's what Housemaster's charges. This is when it's covered. And here's a couple availability for times and dates. That's my service.
Yep.
But in days 20 years ago, they used to collect payment often at the home inspection, but now everything is online. So I'll send the information. Here's the link. Please go on, give them your credit card. I will do the service part for them and then ask them to please jump online, pay, and they'll get the confirmation. How is it that you typically do that process?
It's exactly what I do, Kim. I'll offer to call and see what they have available. And if they want me to do that, I'll ask my clients, what days are best for you, morning, afternoon. And I try to get all that information in advance, because I attend all my home inspections. So I want to make sure that I'm available as well to be at that inspection, and it kind of saves you a step.
Yeah. Now let's talk about that, because some agents don't go. I do go. Do you go the entire time, or do you go for the last hour? And how long do home inspections typically take?
Yeah, I be honest with you, Kim, I try to go to the whole thing. Now, sometimes, if I have another appointment, it runs a little bit late. I may not be there right at the beginning, but I try to. And especially if, letting the inspector in, and that if the seller wants the realtor there and everything. But I like to be there. That way, if my clients, first of all, it gives me a chance to connect again with my clients.
Yeah.
And if something came up that was, pretty serious, or that I'm there and I can see it firsthand.
Mhm.
And that's another thing about inspectors too, whether they do hand or written, some of them don't take photographs.
Mm.
So, obviously it's nice if they do, but that's another reason I'm there. I can at least take pictures on my phone. So if we're sending that to another agent to know exactly what is going on, home inspections can take, probably an hour and a half to 2.
Mhm.
And I like to try to schedule all of them at once,
Mhm.
if they're going to have various ones, because it kind of saves your client time. We're there and it's just a more streamlined process.
And it's a courtesy to the seller too. We book the
Yep.
home inspection, have the pest inspector come. If they've placed the radon, try to place it ahead of time so you can pick up your radon that day. You're in and out, and that's a courtesy to the seller as well.
Yep.
I do go to my home inspections, and I go for the last hour. They like you to come in, the inspectors like you to come in the last half an hour, an hour. I do get there a little before they're done. And I too like to see the review. The inspectors I use typically bring their laptop, and they will go through a very thorough review of what they found, and they take pictures. So if there's an outlet that needs to be repaired, they click right through the slides. It's amazing. It's a very nice procedure. And my buyers always feel like they got good information. And so I like it right there. And then they'll usually say, you'll have that in your inbox tonight. And for me, that works. I like my buyer to walk away. I've had buyers say, wow, they were the best inspector. And
Yeah.
they give you the photos. So there's many
Yep.
different ways. There's no right or wrong way. We're just giving you some good tips to know a little bit more about home inspections. One of the things we do want to remember is that not everything is included in a home inspection. So it's really important to know that, one, in the winter, some inspectors don't get on the roof. Also, you can't turn on an air conditioner in
Right.
winter, right?
Yeah.
And also in the summer, if you have a home that has sprinklers, you'll want to make sure that the sprinkler system is on, and that your inspector, whether or not they will inspect that, or do I need to call a water sprinkling service and have them come out and do that review? Because one sprinkler head can be $100.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
right. And the other thing is, I have found out through experience that they don't inspect chimneys. What other things can you think of that maybe, so we've got a home inspection, typically a pest inspection. I would never advise my client to not have a home inspection, a pest inspection, $60, $80. Radon, we give them a website, we let them decide. That can be a couple $100. But if you get a radon inspection and there's high levels of radon and you put in a system, it's going to be $1,200 to $1,400 depending on the home. They could be more, could be a little less depending where it's located. So that couple $100 could give you a really good negotiating tool.
Oh,
What
yeah.
other things? Yeah, what other inspections do you typically recommend?
And Kim, you brought up a good point. I always recommend a home inspection. I
Mhm.
never say never. That's
Never say-
just a good, a good thing to go by. Yeah, other inspections, well and septic.
Yes.
And a well and septic is a little different, because typically if it's on well and septic and my clients want an inspection, I'll write that for probably up to 15 days, because
Okay.
to get a water test through the county and all that, I may not need that. But I find that the well and septic could take longer, but
Mhm.
there's different, even a sewer scope,
Yes. Yes.
if you're in the city and there's a lot of trees and things like that, we're finding that a lot of buyers, we always recommend, sewer scope, just because you don't want to get that call after the fact. Oh, by the way,
That's a
the
really
drains
good
are
one.
backing up.
Yeah, that's a good one to put on your list for your buyers, your little cheat sheet, because that's really more popular these days. We didn't always do those, but that's a really good reminder as well. Because if the sewer scope, it goes in and looks at the sewer lines, and if the roots have gone into those pipes, it can clog things.
Yeah.
can clog
Oh,
the
yeah.
pipes, and then you get backup. So that's a really good one as well.
Yeah, it's money well spent. And if there's a built-in pool, a pool inspection, because
Yes.
really, just like you said, you know, there's a lot of winter in Michigan and you may not be able to, so you want to call, a pool company and see, and maybe they can look at it or something, but, with an in-ground pool, if it's not up, if it's not full and all that, you know, it's hard to tell whether that's in working order or not. And again, I always check the disclosures. You know, it's just like you said on sprinkler. If they put unknown on the sprinkler system, it's probably a good chance that they're not working.
Right. And the longer a system isn't opened up, the more problems you have when you do open up. I've experienced that. One thing on the pool, don't ever be afraid to ask, because I remember it was 2020 during COVID. It was March. There was snow on the ground, and my buyers won the bid for their home with the pool. And I was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to inspect this pool? So I made a call, and the pool company actually could open that pool. We opened the pool in March, and they did a full inspection on it, and good thing, because we found problems. And then another thing to remember is, okay, what's the procedure after that? Are we closing it? Are we leaving it open for the seller? Because then that question came up, hey, are you closing the pool back up? And I asked, well, do you think you could just maintain it for 6 weeks? But you do face some of these questions that you may not really think about. But we did open it in March, and they maintained it until 6 weeks later when we closed the loan. So don't be afraid to ask questions. What else do we have? Lead-based paint inspection. We don't typically do a lot of those. Have you ever done a lead-based paint inspection?
No,
I haven't either.
no, I've never had a client request a lead-based paint. Of course, it's always offered. Nope, I've never had them.
Okay.
But I think with a lead-based paint, from what I understand, if they do decide to do a lead-based paint, then, you know, obviously the buyers are obligated to put that house back, you know, if they take samples of the paint off the wall or things like that. So you always want to get more information, you know, information.
And what I tell my clients is they are more than welcome, and they should do all inspections, but we know if a home was built before 1978, we know that there's lead in the paint for sure. So therefore, maybe it's been encapsulated, like this building has been painted, but it's really important things like if your dog's a chewer, if they chew on a wall or a trim or a door, there may be toxic paint in there. And that's why we give them the lead-based paint brochure, so they fully understand what lead-based paint is about. So just know that during this time, you might have a reason to call a foundation expert. Sometimes we finish a home inspection, and the inspector may say, I recommend having a roofer come out and look at this leak or look at the roof. I recommend that this crack be investigated or this electrical panel. So often we have to go back and ask for an extension in order to get that professional back in that can give us a more detailed investigation of whatever problem that might be there. So it's really important that we do that as well.
Yeah, you don't want to go beyond your inspection timeline without getting a request in writing
and accepted. That's real important.
Yeah.
It has to be accepted before your 10 days. It's not enough just to ask. I need in writing before my 10 days are up that you're extending it due to needing further investigation regarding the roof. So really, really important. What other thoughts do you have regarding having a home? So we have a home inspection, and I guess let's talk about what other thoughts, and then what do we do with that inspection?
Yeah. So the other thing I do too, Kim, is I want to involve my client as much as possible. I kind of want to, I don't say take myself out of it, but when there are issues with the house, or let's say they find a mold-like substance or that, you know, I make sure that client is talking with the inspector. And if he's recommending someone else, I can make arrangements for that. But I don't give my opinion on that. I refer them to the experts that can give them opinions on that.
Mhm,
You
that's
know, we
good.
don't ever, I'm not a home inspector. So, you know, if my client asks me, well, do you think that's mold? I'm saying, you know, I really don't know. I'm not a mold person. But you know, I can have, you know, refer you to somebody that is, or, you know, I say, you call your home inspector, or if they call after the fact and they haven't, questions on their inspection report, I'll say, you know what, you paid for the report. You want to make sure and call the inspector so he can walk you through that and ask him what he thinks on that. I don't want to give opinion on roof. I don't want to give opinion on anything like that, but I do want to direct my clients and make sure they get the answers that they need.
That's good. And often we do have questions that come up, and like you said, the buyer has paid for that, and they are the best source for explaining anything. And there's times when I do a well and septic inspection, I might not understand what they're saying about the well.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot to a well.
there's a lot to a well, and I will call them up and say, explain to me, please, what does this mean? And just remember, on an inspection report, there is boilerplate language, and that's to protect the inspector. And so they are going to point out everything. So when I bring my clients to a home inspection, I do empt them with, this is an older home. And so they're going to inspect the home. They're going to run the dishwasher, turn on the stove. They're going to check everything about the home, and you want to make sure that that is what your inspector will do. That's what mine do.
Yep.
But just know that this is a used home. It's a home that's been lived in, and it's not brand new. So this is a really nice report, regardless if we ask for any repairs or not. And it does give you a nice scope of your home, and you understand. But that doesn't mean, in my particular situation, that I'm going to ask for every single thing that's on that report. It is for information purposes only. And I guide my clients to focus on, if there's a cracked window, and you can call the window repair company and it's done for $50 or $100. And I would recommend, or if there's some outlets that my buyer can do once they move in, or I will say, can you do that? And if they can do it, let's just leave that off. I know we advise differently, but let's focus on the $1,200 or the $1,400 radon system, because sometimes, and it's all different ways of negotiation, we all do it different, but
Yep.
I really want to focus on the mold, on the radon. It doesn't say we can't, our contract doesn't say we can't ask for those things, but I want to be a good negotiator. And if you can fix the downspout and the little things, the little honeydew list, let's just leave that alone, and let's go for the big ticket items that really make a difference. That's my way of negotiating.
Yep.
But everybody does it different.
Yeah, no, I advise my clients, I say, hey, look, we're going to have a home inspection, and the things, you know, in really a home inspection, inspector is going to go through the home, and they're going to look at everything. They're going to look at the, you know, the cupboard door that may be loose, you know, all that. And because every house, I don't care if it's a brand new house, it's going to have things that need to be done. The real thing you need to concentrate on are the health hazards, things like that, you know, and the loan program, you know, just like Kim, you said, a cracked window. If it's a VA loan, that VA appraiser is going to require that window to get fixed. But I let them know, you know, things like, you know, little things like their knobs on the cupboard, they're gonna notate all that. And what's kind of nice about that is you actually have a plan down the road. Like if you're going to redo the cupboards, then let's not concentrate on the cupboards. You know, you're going to tear them out anyways. But the major things and the health hazards and all that,
handrails, cracked windows, peeling paint.
Yeah.
And we can, like we said, it's not limited, but we do want to focus on getting the best value for asking for repairs. So that's really important to help guide your clients, so they have certain expectations.
Yeah, and I'm honest with them up front. You know, look, we can ask for everything you want.
Yes.
No problem.
No problem.
But if we're competing, it could be an issue. If the seller says no, then we're back to renegotiating. Or if the seller, the seller may offer a dollar amount,
Yep.
but, however
Everything's
the client
negotiable.
wants to do it, but I also tell them exactly kind of how it could work. And I give them each option. So
Right.
they know.
And the good thing is when we walk away from that home inspection, we know a possible age of the roof and about how much life is left in it. We
Yeah.
know a possible age, close age to, and sometimes there's a sticker, sometimes there's not, and the inspector will look around to find what they need to give us an idea of what is the age of the furnace, the water heater. They'll look at the pipes, the electrical panel. There's a lot of things, and one of the thing I wanted to bring up is my home inspectors, they don't mind if a client comes for the whole thing, but they have asked me not to have them follow them around because they say it slows them down and it breaks their concentration. So my particular home inspectors say, you can come if you'd like, but we would rather you wait until we're done with the inspection, then we'll review it with you. And if we have to walk through those items again, we will. But that's their preference because they want to focus on looking at the home and not answering all these questions until the end. So like we said, they're not all created equal.
Right.
So the last couple things here that before we wrap up, we want to talk about is how do you choose one and what do they cost for home inspections?
Yeah, I think you have to, like we talked about earlier, I think you have to look at what they offer. Are they doing a handwritten computer report? How quickly do they do it? When are they available? You want them to be available within your inspection timeline. And you also want to know, do they get on the roof? Do they check appliances? Now, some of them won't do appliances.
Okay.
Do they do that? Do they do radon? Do they have other contractors that, are available that could do those kind of things?
What's their experience? How long have they been in the business?
Exactly. And some of them are licensed. Some of them aren't.
Some of them are.
So you really want, and I always tell people, get on the website, check them out. But a lot of times they'll have on there, if I had other clients that use those, I'd say, hey, you can call and find out if they were happy with them. I really want them to be comfortable with who they are, who they have. But the other thing is also a really good inspector will take questions after the sale.
That's good.
Clients can call them and ask questions. If they're confused on what to do. So I think that's a really important quality in an inspector.
And sometimes, and I like that, and sometimes I have to call the inspector because at the end of the report, typically they'll give you a summary and then they'll flag some of the items. It's not limited to that, but they do give you a summary so you can decide what does my buyer want to ask for, if any repairs. And so that's really helpful. And sometimes I have to call them to get more information so I know how to write it up. But typically the summary page will help give me the verbiage that I need to write up that repair addendum and ask for the repairs. So I really like that. I think that's very helpful. And then, once you get the report, you decide if your clients are going to ask for repairs, what that looks like. And then you get it over to the other agent within your timeline and then watch your specific contract on what the protocol is and how many days you have to submit, negotiate, and follow those timelines really closely. And then the last thing is also cost. They all vary. Typically, it may be on square footage. Like how big is the home?
Yeah, a lot of inspectors will do that. The other thing I do too, Kim, when, you write up an addendum, if you've got repairs in that, is I'll always ask the buyer, are you comfortable with me? Like if that listing agent said, could you please send me the inspection report? I don't just send it. I don't own it. The buyer does.
Right.
So I always ask permission. And if it's just a couple items, I'll say, if you're okay with it, can I send them a copy of that summary page and that? But I always ask permission because they own it.
They own it.
The buyer does. Yeah, the cost of the inspection, and all of them are broken up separately too, a lot of them are broken up separately too, a lot of
Right.
time. Like
Right.
your radon could be 100 to 200, your pest inspection, home inspection, anywhere, I don't know, 300 to 500, I would
Mhm.
say.
Right, depending on how many items you choose to have specifically
Yeah,
inspected. So, and the other thing is when I meet with my buyers, we talk about that as one of the expenses for coming out of pocket. A home inspection is paid for by the buyer. And if you get out, you don't get that money back. It is purely for inspection. So I like when I'm going through a home before we write an offer, I like to look at things because if there's a deal breaker now, there's no reason investing another $400, $500, $600 into that home when you know you need a new roof and that's a deal breaker for you. So we want to look, we look for leaking leaks, on the ceiling. We check the age of the furnace. We look at the disclosures. It's really important not just to win the bid, but also to, avoid spending money that they're going to get out of. And yes, absolutely get out of it during your inspection period versus buying a home that you don't want. But every time you do that, it could be $500 or $600 that you're out of pocket to investigate that home. And you might be able to do a lot of that before you bring in an inspector. So that's really good wisdom.
Oh, yeah. And especially like depending on if you're doing an FHA loan and a VA and you've got falling down buildings out back and all that,
It's not going to work, right? It won't pass.
It's not going to happen. And
Right.
it could save you money up front because you already know, or like you said, Kim, the peeling paint and all that.
Depending on the type of loan, some of these things just won't pass. So that's not going to work for that particular buyer with that particular loan. So
for sure.
Yeah, so a lot of good points here. Any final thoughts that you can think of that you'd like to talk about regarding home inspections? Anything that is on your mind?
I think probably one of the most important thing is always recommend it to your clients. Don't be afraid, and don't be afraid to discuss the various inspections. And like Kim said, she discusses that with her clients right up front. When I meet with buyers and they ask, what do you, what's an estimate of out of pocket? I try to figure in those inspections and all that, because that will be something out of pocket. But well worth it. Because you're buying a house, it's
buying a house.
not a car, it's a house.
Yes. And that's why I like the 5-star pre-offer addendum, because it goes through the steps of the purchase agreement. And it's a great time to have a conversation because it covers earnest money, home inspections. And often buyers, if they're a first-time buyer, they don't really know that what the expenses are going to be. That can also be part of our buyer consultation as well. But we always want our buyers to be informed. And it's just the answer is always yes to a home inspection. If your buyer chooses to waive a home inspection, our pre-offer addendum has a box that they check and say, I understand what I am waiving, and it's a hold harmless. And we really want to use those forms because our answer is we always recommend a home inspection. It is to the benefit of the buyer to understand what they're buying. And I know in previous days with multiple offers, those were being waived. And I don't care for that at all. I like to say, we'll do a home inspection, but we won't ask for repairs. And we still have the right to get out, because if there's a deal breaker, I want to know it before we go to the closing table. I don't want to know it a month later. I want to know it now.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't want your buyer buying somebody else's problem. That's for sure.
No, absolutely not. So, well, this has been a really, really good conversation with you. Thank you for coming on and
thank you, Kim.
Yeah, we always have a good time together and share a lot of information. The time goes so fast. And so it is Thursday, or excuse me, today is Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday? Oh.
It's Wednesday, January 25th.
We got a busy day. Hey, if you're in the Lansing area, we've got dot loop class. Kim is leading our dot loop class at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock here.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, so come on over. I braved the snow, wasn't so bad.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm hanging out here today with Cindy and some of the agents. So if you're in the area, come over and we're going to help you with some tips and tricks and just help you get through this learning dot loop. I know for many of the Lansing agents, it's a change from what you previously used. So
Yeah.
just know we are here today, and this group is always fun to be with. So
Great.
yeah, so well, thank you for being here, and everybody.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, everyone enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you this afternoon.
Have a great day, everybody.
See ya.